Hello everyone, hope you all are well and fine. Today's lecture topic is going to be on diagnostic skills. These are your learning outcomes. To start off with, let's come to an understanding what is diagnosis. We all have already learned a significant amount regarding diagnosis in the Department of Oral Medicine and Radiology in your fourth year. And as a continuation, when you move to a clinical practice setup, which is mimicked in general dentistry, the primary part of any any disease approach to any disease or any condition and the treatment planning for the patient starts with diagnosis. So, what is diagnosis? Diagnosis is identification of the oral diseases by interviewing, examining, and synthesizing the descriptive features of the diseases and facts obtained from the examination and the interview. In another definition, diagnosis is defined as ability of a clinician to recognize or identify a specific abnormality and the ability to give a name to the disease process. I can kind of understand that you are having a deja vu moment. You thought this diagnosis is over with fourth year, and here we are yet again. The reason why diagnosis is being yet again and again and again, brought in back to your curriculum is it is very key to have a diagnosis before we establish a diagnosis or have a working diagnosis before we further proceed into further investigations and treatment plan. Hence, it's a very significant role because in various walks of clinics or hospitals that you might work or you might own in the future, there might be essential investigatory equipments, radiology, histopathology, and all the specialty equipments that are required. And sometimes you might not have it. But either way, for all of them, the basis is formed with the basic clinical history and examination. So, what is the importance of diagnosis? So, Jutel et al. Has mentioned that diagnosis has important implications for patient care, research, and policy. So, diagnosis has been described as both as a process and a classification scheme or a pre-existing set of categories agreed upon by the medical profession to designate to a specific condition. So it is very important that that is why we spent a lot of time in oral medicine, radiology, in periodontics, in all the other departments, studying about various diagnoses. What are the different history and what are the various clinical features that attributes to a specific diagnosis. These this combination of these clinical features and history, which leads to a diagnosis, is something that is kind of like you know. Agreed upon by the medical fraternity with a considerable amount of data. So even for building up this data and base the patient care and the further research and policy, you need diagnosis for a condition. When a diagnosis is accurate and made in a timely manner, a patient has the best opportunity for a positive health outcome because clinical decision making will be tailored to a correct understanding of the patient's health problem. And moving on, public policy decisions are often influenced by diagnostic information such as payment policies, resource allocation decisions, and research priorities. So it doesn't matter whether you are going to be a clinician or you are going to be in policy decision making or you are going to do a community service for basing all your understanding of a disease and how to approach it in a community, through the community. It is very important for us to establish a diagnosis. One example that we can give is the current situation we are in, the COVID. So the thing is that now that we are forming an understanding around the disease of COVID and we have given the name COVID, we are able to, the policy makers are able to set policies towards it. They are able to allocate resources for it, and they are able to like tailor fit the requirements of the community based on the diagnosis. Hence, diagnosis is very important and significant in medical practice. So how does it usually happen? We all know the routine. So whatever I'm telling, please match it up to what we do here in our institution, and you will understand that whatever we have been doing is being done in a very systematic way, that is being followed in a large scale. So first, to start with, patient experiences a health problem and he comes to a healthcare system. In this case, a clinic, a dental clinic, or a hospital or institution. Then the patient is first taken to either if you have all the various specialty, he is taken to a oral medicine this thing, or a particular a designated dentist first does the diagnosis part. So what do you do in this diagnosis part? First, there is information integration and interpretation, and information gathering, and a working diagnosis is formulated. So what are all the factors that contribute to this working diagnosis? Clinical history and interview, physical exam, diagnostic testing, and also referral and consultation from specialists when required. And from then on, there is communication of the diagnosis, that is, the health problem is communicated to the patient, and with the patient's consent and with the patient's understanding of the disease, then a treatment plan is formulated and it is implemented, and the outcome is monitored as to see whether it is a favorable outcome or if there is any modification that is required or further tests needed. So the diagnostic skill of a clinician, you can basically categorize them as investigative skills and analytical skills. So acquiring a clinical history and interviewing a patient provides an important information for determining a diagnosis, and also establishes a solid foundation for the relationship between a clinician and the patient. A common maxim in the medicine is attributed to William Osler, and it is just what he says is that just listen to your patient and he's telling you the diagnosis. This particular phrase just signifies how much important clinical history is, because most of the facts that are derived from the clinical history is attributed directly to the diagnosis. For example, if I have to give you an example, patient walks in with a pain, we tend to engage the patient and ask him. Sometimes patients are self-explanatory. They'll tell you what type of pain it is, how frequently he has the pain, and sometimes we have to initiate it with a question, and we have to derive those information, because all these informations are key, and the more the patient gives us, the more information, the better it is for us to will help us in formulating the diagnosis. We'll discuss how it goes. When it comes to investigative skills, it helps you to discover and name the problem with which your patient presents. So these investigative skills can be kind of like subdivided into interrogatory skills, descriptive skills, and summative skills. So what is this interrogatory skills? How to ask your patient questions and how to follow up with other questions until you get the information you need. One example I can give you for interrogatory skills is that you would have very commonly come across this in oral medicine and radiology. That patient will say that I am a diabetic. I was told by my doctor that I'm a diabetic, but he said no need of any medicine or anything. Sometimes it gets a little confusing. How come he's been diagnosed diabetic and he says that there is no need of medicine? Usually patients tend to stop with that. It is because of our questioning we try to understand it furthermore. That patient just went once, and patient would have been told that he's a pre-diabetic after monitoring him for a long time, and he would have been advised to control the or get better with just diet and exercise. These kind of information, further information, can only be derived when we further question into it. Patient will say asthmatic, but he says patient will say asthmatic, but he does not use any inhaler or any tablet, and he has not been using it for a long time, but he will give a clear history of asthma. So our further questioning in these cases will be required. So it might be that he's a seasonal asthma, or he just gets asthmatic only due to certain allergy to certain elements. So these kind of things, when the patient doesn't mention, we can only bring it out with questioning, that is interrogating. When we use the word interrogation, please do not take it to the extreme sense of putting the patient in a spot and asking questions. That will only make the patient very uneasy, and patient will differ from telling the truth. uh, our questions should be formulated, and it should be put out to the patient with some kind of with the concern and empathy, so that the patient understands that we are just trying to get information which will benefit us in terms of treatment, rather than trying to kind of like find fault or find something with the patient. That usually generally kinds of spooks the patient, and then they start getting defensive. They're not very open with you. And then secondly it is descriptive skills. So descriptive skills allow you to see accurately what you are looking at and notice what is important and relevant. And finally, summative skills. It's a brief summary of the statement of the problem that says what you need to say and no more. So these are the integral part of the investigative skills. And obtaining a history can be challenging in some cases, like I told before. For example, in working with older adults with memory loss, or with children, or with individuals who have health problems which limit the communication or reliable self-reporting. In these cases, it might be necessary to include family members and caregivers in the history taking process. Uh, to this aspect, I can go even one step further and say that if the patient you're treating is not a legal adult, or if the patient is not coherent, is of any age of life, but is not coherent, is not making sense when he's talking to you regarding his history, or if he is a special person who has some kind of physical or mental disability which prevents him from communicating his problem exactly, then you should always look for the next of kin to try and maximum derive as much as information as possible. Moving on to analytical skills. First is to compare information that you gather with a known body of information on diseases and decide the most probable cause of your patient's problem. And secondly, how to make a decision when you don't have enough information. And third is what you have to do to get the information you need. Deciding what to do to treat your patients once you know what is causing their problem, and to follow up your treatment and learn from the results. So analytical skills is almost like it is something that is applied right from the beginning of your case history, and even after you have formulated a diagnosis and when you are going through treatment. You constantly keep analyzing the situation, and you apply various methods to try and get as much information as possible. For example, patient says that I have a pre-existing heart condition, but I'm not really aware of the specifics of it. I know that I'm taking some 5-6 tablets a day, but I'm not very really aware of it. Then in that condition, without overlooking the problem there, it's a wise thing, wise and analytical skill to get in touch with the patient's physician, or the specialist, and try to get an understanding of the patient's condition, so that we can modify our treatments accordingly. So this is where our referrals and everything comes in. And number two, you perform a clinical history, and you perform a clinical examination, but you feel that you do not have all the information that you need. Then you conduct an investigation, and you incorporate that information into your the pre-existing data, whatever you have. These all comes under the umbrella of analytical skills. And also finally, to follow up your treatment after deriving a diagnosis, formulating a treatment, and performing the treatment, and again learn from the results by following it up, learning from your results whether it has worked out for the patient, if it has worked out, what has worked out clearly, and what has not worked out in such manner. So how to get started? Like I said, please take this whatever I'm telling, and please match it up to whatever we have done in oral medicine and radiology already. As you all remember our format, case sheet format already. So there is a consent page in the front page, and you get the patient's consent from the patient with a self declaration saying regarding the patient's medical conditions, patient's habits, especially, which is like kind of like in our clinic, it is specifically designed for a dental setup. And you also have a general format which is available in most of the hospitals, other hospitals also. And we start with patient's consent, and consent to undergo examination, undergo investigations, and undergo treatment from our place. by self-declaring all the health ailments and his habits and his history, known medical history, divulging his known medical history of any infectious contagious diseases and any systemic diseases such. And then we start with the history part of the case sheet. We record the chief complaint, history of presenting illness, medical dental history. Then we go to the clinical examination, and finally we create a working diagnosis. Then we conduct the investigations, final diagnosis, and treatment plan. So, what are the types of patients that you will come across? So far, we have only worked on our part of the the diagnostics, but an important stakeholder in this entire operation is the patient. Without a patient, there is no there is nothing for you to investigate or examine history. So what about the patient? So how do we classify or how do we categorize the patients? So you can categorize them broadly into four categories. First one being philosophical, second one exacting, third one hysterical, and fourth one indifferent. In a way, this is in a way understanding the psychology of the patient, so as to we can modify our approach accordingly. To start off with the philosophical patient. Sorry, I mentioned psychological before. It's philosophical. So the philosophical patient is someone who accepts the dentist's judgment and instructions and the best prognosis. This is the best type of patient that you can have. Generally, they will ask for your opinion. They will listen keenly to what you have to say, and they will trust your judgment and they'll follow up. These are patients who have the potential to becoming a long-term, a long-term patient, or your devoted patient to you. If you do the right, if you do everything right, they will be a very devoted patient. They will listen to you. They will trust your judgment, and they will follow everything that you say. And these kinds of patient are generally cooperative with all the treatment procedures that you kind of propose. And the second character is exacting. If you notice here in Malaysia, a majority of these patients will fall under this exacting category. There are a lot of philosophical patients also, but you would have experienced this in the clinics while even you have seen so many patients in various departments. They are methodical, they are demanding, and they ask a lot of questions. And usually it's a very good prognosis. These patients, they'll be questioning, and they'll be demanding. They will want all the information. They will not be convinced. They will ask more. They will do their own background research, and they will come back and ask more questions. They'll not just be convinced with just with a simple straightforward explanation. They'll ask more doubts. They'll be more curious. This is actually not definite. This is definitely not a bad quality in a patient, not to be worried about. It's just that we have to address these concerns with confidence and empathy. And when we do that, and the patient is clarified of all his doubts in his mind, he will definitely be very cooperative and will go for all the necessary treatments that the dentist proposes. They are also a very good category of patients to have, and very good for practice. And number three is hysterical. Now this, from this class 3 is where the our we need to change, we need to make a little bit of change in our approach to the patient. So class 3 are emotionally unfit, they are never happy, and they are generally with worst prognosis. Again, category of patients who can be a little difficult to handle, because no matter how simplified you make your dental procedure or the patient's condition and you explain it to them, they will still not they'll still not get it. They'll just like the exacting type, they'll come out with a lot of questions, but they'll never be convinced. Even after treatment, they'll still never be convinced, and they'll come back and they'll keep kind of like complaining about the previous procedures, and it goes on and on and on. These are patients that we have to be we have to take an extra mile. We need to have a if we already have a positive approach, we need to have a much more of a positive approach, because when the patient is not very happy and very emotionally unfit, that kind of pushes some kind of negativity even in the operating dentist. So if you are approaching a patient with, let us say, 100% positivity, these kind of patients you have to approach with a 200 or more percent of positivity. And it is also very important in these kind of patients that you document and you take consent at every step of the the treatment, or any modification that you do to the treatment. It is important that you take consent before you approach this patient. This is for the safety of both the patient and the operator. It is not something that we should not we should not it's not like we should not worry too much about this patient. We should not do anything or anything like that. We should execute our duties, but with a little bit of a caution. And it serves best for both the dentist and as well as the patient. So in case of his future doubts, when we go back and refer to his clinical history and everything, patient will also understand that every step along the way his consent to the treatment has been taken, and patient has been explained clearly regarding the treatment. And class 4 is the toughest cookie of all. It is indifferent. They don't care about the dental treatment and they give up easily. They come to the clinic when they have pain, and when we say that they have to undergo a certain procedure for them to alleviate the problem, they give up very easily. No matter how much effort we put in, they give up very easily. And these kind of patients, again, we have to treat them. We have to go all the way with with more positivity, and we just do our best. We remember, it is not in our right to force any treatment on any patient. We do our best to explain the problem, and we do our best to explain the treatment procedure. It is, at the end of the day, it is the patient's will, or the patient's will and wish to undergo the treatment procedure, or even undergo the investigation, or the even screening, that is examination and case history. If the patient is denying all of this, it is we do not have any right to force it upon a patient. Please keep this in mind. You might see something alarming, something very wrong in a patient. You might see, like, for example, let us say patient came with a complaint of ulcer, chronic non-healing ulcer, which has been there for 2-3 months. We know that it is something, it is very worrisome. Now you are worried, you want to conduct more investigations, but patient is denying all of that. It is very important that we emphasize on every single possibility. If possible, even if there is someone accompanying the patient, talk to them, explain everything to them before you let the patient go. But we can never force our impressions and our this thing, and we cannot, certainly not force any treatment on a patient uh, without their. Moving on to case history. So this is going to be much more like what we have discussed previously in oral medicine radiology. So the patient should be encouraged to tell his or her story voluntarily. The clinician only interrupts to obtain clarification or further information regarding specific points. The quality of the history is largely determined by the competence of the interviewer, and also affected by the ability of the patient to communicate. I hope now you get a clarity as to why we were pushing you to ensure that you get all the information. When you miss any information during your oral medicine radiology diagnosis, we tend to come and kind of emphasis that you need to communicate further. You need to derive this information from the patient. You cannot just overlook it, or you cannot just bypass it and directly go to examination. This is the reason why we have always been persistent in regarding to this. I know I'm sounding a little self-clarifying, but a lot of things comes into perspective, because in general dentistry, it is almost similar to that of a clinical practice. You're not just going to restrict yourself. When it comes to oral medicine radiology, you restrict yourself only until the formulation of the treatment, and it is executed elsewhere in another department. But when it comes to general dentistry, you diagnose the patient, you formulate the treatment, and you also execute the treatment in the same place. So it is kind of like a simulation for a dental practice, for a small practice. So it kind of gives you a perspective of how your practice is going to be. So moving on to the common complaints of patients, what the patients will come to you for is a painful teeth, dirty teeth, missing teeth and need for dentures, cavities, aesthetics, routine checkup and specific lesions. So questions, what type of questionings? So when I talk to you about interrogating a patient, asking questions sometimes, what type of questions can be asked? So now there are various questions. There are open-ended questions, there are close-ended questions, and there are leading questions. These are, if you see exactly, this is the similar kind of pattern which is led with which is also led with which is also done in general medicine practice also. So when a patient says I came with I have pain, then you can put on with an open-ended question like tell me about the pain. So if the patient gives you all the adequate information with an open-ended question, it's well and fine. If the patient says that I have a very on and off pain on and off, and it feels very pressing type of pain, and it aggravates while eating, all of this information that we require is given with single question, it's fine. But sometimes patient, if something is left out that is required, that is very important for you. For example, patient on the course of explaining about the pain forgets to describe the pain, then you kind of ask a very narrow question or a pointed question like or a close question like what does the pain feel like. And then sometimes you kind of like and patient is still not able to explain, then you use something like a leading question, how does it feel like for example, does it feel like a sharp pain, like an electric shock like pain, or throbbing type of pain. So these are the various formats of questions that you are questioning the patient during clinical history. So again, to reiterate and start with the case history, first we take a consent, then we do the demographic data of the patient. One another thing is that here we have a dedicated resource for writing down the demographics of the patient. But in our own clinical practice, usually be done by the receptionist, or we'll have to do certain parts of the demography by ourselves. Name of the patient, age and gender of the patient. In our case, the IC number is mandatory. IC patient providing the IC for any form of treatment plan is mandatory. Occupation of the patient and address of the patient. Then to move on with, we take the chief complaint of patient. We all know that the chief complaint of the patient is recorded in the patient's own words. And then from the chief complaint, we formulate the history of present illness or history of presenting illness, where you describe more on the chief complaint. For example, if the patient says I have pain, then you describe more on the pain. What is the type of pain, whether it is continuous or intermittent, what is the aggravating factor, what is the relieving factor, what is the intensity of the pain in terms of VA score or in terms of normal categorization like mild, moderate or severe. So all these information about pain are gathered. For example, patient says I have a swelling, then you gather more information about the swelling. When did the swelling start? uh, uh, did it appear like as large as it is now, or it appeared smaller and grew gradually? So you can start with open-ended questions, and when you don't have adequate information, you can ask the closed question, and sometimes you can guide the patient with the leading question. Then the most important fact which I have always emphasized on is the medical and the drug history. Most of the patient treatment complications, let it be treatment complications or even complications related to any medication or anything, can be averted if we take a very good patient history. So medical history is very important. When you write medical history, please do not bluntly write patient is diabetic and let it go. Please be very descriptive. Mention that for how many years he has been diabetic, currently what type of medication he is on, what is the frequency of that medication, and for example, in case of diabetes, whether he's just taking more lipoglycemics or he's also under insulin therapy, insulin dependent, non-dependent, diabetes type 1, type 2, all these have to be mentioned clearly. uh, Similarly, for cardiovascular diseases, if patient says I am under medication, then history of the cardiovascular disease, when it was first diagnosed, has he undergone any procedure, or is he under any medication, is he taking blood thinners, when is the last time he visited his cardiologist, and what is the current condition of his cardiac CVS problem. has all is all necessary to be investigated further and has to be detailedly explained. And when it comes to drug history, if the patient is currently under any under any medication, or the patient has any allergy to drugs, all of this fall under the drug history. Moving on to dental history, patient's past history of dental treatments, and especially if the if the current complaint is directly, directly connected to the past dental treatment, it is very important to elaborate it as much as possible and get as much information as possible. For example, patient will have had pain in a previously restored tooth. In that condition, you need to ask the patient, before the previous restoration, did you have pain? During the restorative procedure, did you have pain? Post restoration, immediately do you have pain, or it just started long after the restoration was done? So such kind of information is also very essential. So dental history. Then moving on to family history, any known genetic or familial conditions that exists in their family is important for a family history. And social history, if the patient you know what about the patient's social condition, and because a lot of the uh, some of the conditions are directly attributed to the patient's socioeconomic status, and also to some extent the patient's social, and also the mental awareness of the patient in regards to the social history. So that also needs to be acquired. Patient's personal history about his habits, dental hygiene, and oral care. Then we have a part called the general examination, which uh, you know generally generally talks about the patient's height, weight, gait, and also patients, if there is any anemia, ruber, any anemia, pallor, or if there is any jaundice that is with icterus, or if let us say patient presents with cyanosis, or these kind of things have to be noticed. As health professionals, it is our duty to notice if patient comes. This is something that was told to be by one of my professors, and I think it is very important that I mention it here. Yeah, the one thing that he always says is, don't just look into the hole that is inside the oral cavity. Look at the patient as whole, WHOLE. So what it means is that just don't make the patient say look into his oral cavity and just fill up his dental caries and send him off. We have been trained professionally with the knowledge of general medicine, general surgery, anatomy, physiology. Not just because we are just going to treat the oral cavity. It is important. We are going to treat only in the oral cavity, but it is important to look the patient as the whole, as a person. So even if the patient doesn't mention, please look for these features. Look for clubbing in the fingers. Look at the toes. Look for signs of, let us say, for example, severe cases of arthritis, osteoporosis. They can be expressed in the toes. See if there is any edema of the feet, and look for any color changes over the skin. The general skin texture, and see for if he's giving any signs of jaundice with icterus, that is yellowishness in the conjunctiva, the anemia. Again, you look at the conjunctiva, you also look at the tongue. Tongue gives you very important signs for anemia. Then you also look at the patient in the fingernails. You look for koilonychia and all these things. And if required, and see if the patient is kind of like, the moment he walks to a chair and sits down, if he's wheezing, whether he's breathing normally or he's wheezing a little bit. If required, take the blood pressure, do a auscultative examination of his heart and breath sounds. These some might argue these does not fall under the purview of the dentist, because what is the dentist going to do? But these are all very important for us to avert a boatload of complications that come with it. We should never be negligent, or we should never be oblivious to all these factors. And this is the prime reason why we go through the first 3 years of all these training to look out for all these signs. uh, If it is necessary, please jot it down in your case sheet. If you find that patient has this bluish discoloration on the tip of his nose or in his fingers, if you see central or peripheral cyanosis, please make a note of it. And before you start treating the patient, please send to a medical physician to get a consent. And if the patient is not aware of it, get it checked out. If the patient is aware of it and you have not mentioned it in the clinical history, so when you take the medical history, apart from getting information from the patient, also look at the patient on the whole and try and understand uh, uh, about his medical conditions. If we do this, we can avoid a lot of medical or any treatment complications that as an outcome when we do our treatment, especially when you go for minor or minor oral surgery procedures. It is very, very important. Um, so, for example, if you take clubbing of the fingers or cyanosis as a sign, you would have already learnt about it in general medicine, how much significant it is. What are all the information that central and peripheral cyanosis tells us, and identifying can not only be beneficial for our treatment planning, it can also sometimes be beneficial for the patient, especially when he is not aware about his condition. And moving on after that is the the facial symmetry, the swelling, that is the gland, the lymph node examination, salivary gland examination, and the TMJ examination. And then further on, we move on to intraoral examination, where we categorize it as soft tissue exam and hard tissue exam. In soft tissue exam, we examine the gingiva, the frenal attachment, and the lip, and the buccal mucosa, labial mucosa, the palate, the tongue. In the tongue, again, you categorize it as dorsal surface, lateral surface, ventral surface, floor of the mouth, and also the vestibule, the labial and the buccal vestibules, upper and lower, left and right, and the fascial pillars, all of them. And then moving on to the hard tissue exam. In hard tissue exam, uh, we follow, we calculate the number of teeth, and we have this for caries. We have this ICIDAS sheet, which you are all very well aware of. Apart from that, see, one thing I would like to emphasize again, and I would like to I would like to insist and tell that don't mistake your ICIDAS for a complete hard tissue exam. Please never do that mistake. ICIDAS is dedicated purely for the sake of caries and caries related conditions in the oral cavity. There are a lot of other things that can happen in the dental hard tissue apart from caries. Like for example, enamel hypoplasia that may be as a result of amelogenesis, dentinogenesis imperfecta, or chronic fluorosis, or let us say there is a developmental anomaly of the teeth, a taurodont, or a microdont, or a pig lateral, that is anatomical modifications of due to development, and all. There are various other things, wasting disorders of the teeth, attrition, abrasion, erosion. All of these things do not have place in ICIDAS. So with that itself, you can easily understand that ICIDAS is purely dedicated for the sake of caries. Please don't just look at ICIDAS and let go of the remaining things. It is very important. If you have noticed in our case sheet, we have separate headings that have been dedicated for it, for the most important factors such as mobility, attrition, abrasion, erosion, fracture of the teeth, and all of these things. And there will be an open category such as other findings, which are sometimes very rare to come across. For example, what I mentioned before, amelogenesis and dentinogenesis imperfecta is not a very common incidence, and we do not come across them very commonly in our dental clinics here. But nonetheless, you need to examine and find out and categorize them too accordingly in hard tissue examination. So apart from ICIDAS, all of these have to be mentioned. Root stumps, fractured discolored teeth, mobility, and also most importantly, for the sake of orthodontics, occlusion. We will lead with something as simple as the angles classification. Then comes the ICIDAS scoring, where and then you do a caries risk assessment. After you complete all of this, then if there is a tooth of a specific interest, then you do a then you write down the tooth of interest and you perform an extensive examination in the tooth of interest. You do tender percussion test, you palpate that area, you check for mobility, you do vitality test, and whatever is required. and that is in terms of chair side. In terms of right next to the, in terms of examination you do, and you arrive at a, based on the facts that are derived from the history and the examination, you come to a working diagnosis, or in other words it is also called a provisional diagnosis. So provisional diagnosis can also be called as a working diagnosis. Now, if you think that the information that you have already procured, for example, if you are examining the patient for caries, by looking at the tooth with an ICIDA 04, 03, like 05, you already know it is caries. So if you think it is caries incipient, or it is just a cavity which can be restored without necessity for further investigation, we can work the treatment plan based on the provisional diagnosis itself. But if there is any room for, that further information needs to be got, like for example it's a 05 cavity, now you want to confirm if there is pulpal involvement or not, even though the patient says I do not have pain, I do not have any other problem, patient still wants to get it, patient wants to get it filled, but you are not sure whether, in case of that question of unsureness or uncertainty, you opt for an investigation. In this case, for example, you take an intraoral periapical radiograph, or if it is proximal, then you take a bite-wing radiograph. So like that you go for, then you do a vitality test, then you make a diagnostic cast. You can do histopathological examinations like biopsy, brush biopsy, simple smear test, or swab test, anything for that matter, whole saliva examination. All of these things can be performed as an investigation to get that additional information that is required. Then all the factors are weighed in, that is your history, examination, your working diagnosis, the information, or the the radiographic diagnosis or histopath diagnosis, or your vitality test result. All of these are put together and you formulate a final diagnosis. You formulate a treatment plan based on this final diagnosis. Now, to be little descriptive of what are these different, what are the various diagnoses that we have. Provisional diagnosis, at the onset of diagnostic investigation, provisional diagnosis is made. This implies that available information favors a certain diagnosis, but additional diagnostic studies will need to be conducted to substantiate this impression. Then we have final diagnosis after investigations. This indicates a definitive diagnosis that has been made on the basis of all necessary observation and laboratory investigations. Then we have something called as a differential diagnosis. A differential diagnosis, when different diseases are held responsible for the patient's signs and symptoms, a differential diagnosis is made. One by one diseases are ruled out and according to the signs and symptoms produced. So for example, uh, let's say the patient expresses 4 or 5 symptoms, as that is contributing to his chief complaint. Those 5 symptoms can be, can contribute to 3 or 4 different diagnoses. Then it is important for us to conduct the investigations and necessary tests to rule out all the other differential and to arrive at a final diagnosis, thus moving on to a plan. So that sometimes the time pressures often involved in clinical appointment also contribute to challenges in clinical history and interview. Limited time for clinical visits among various reasons may lead to an incomplete picture of the patient's relevant history and current signs and symptoms. Now that you have progressed from just oral medicine radiology and into general dentistry in a clinical setup, it is very, sometimes it can be very time consuming. You might have 4 or 5 patients waiting, but when you go through this entire ordeal, sometimes we tend to like rush and bypass a few things, and then we directly jump into the patient's treatment of the chief complaint of the patients, and we just overlook a lot of other things. These time pressures can be due to various reasons. It's not necessary that it is the dentist who is just overlooking it. Sometimes the patient might come and he might say, doctor, you don't worry about anything else, you just put some filling in this area. I have very urgent work, I need to do this and I need to leave, please do this fast. Then it might be the patient, it might be the, or it might even be the condition. Let us say, for example, due to some reason you might want to shut down the clinic, and a patient has come with an emergency, you have to do. That is again a pressure. So there are various time pressures, various reasons that can contribute to this time pressure, and can make it little challenging for you to get the entire clinical history, do the systematic proper examination as we have described before. As you go on further into practice, there is always this scope of jumping the gun and going to this directly addressing the chief complaint and sending the patient away without looking into other factors. And this is a little problematic. We should find an we should, we should make ourselves, during our period of time, we should make ourselves more efficient, that we don't overlook any of these things and we do not bypass any of the systemic part of this examination, and we just just look at the whole, not the patient as a whole. And finally, yet another important significant factor for for being a good clinical clinician or a diagnostician is referral and consultation. So clinicians may refer or consult with other clinicians formally or informally. That is, for example, formally, if the person is not known to you, or even known to you, but when you want to document it properly, or informally you just call them up and ask, you may call up another dental colleague of yours who is a very good friend of yours, and explain him the situation and find out from him a few get his impression, whether it's formally or informally, to seek additional expertise about a patient's health problem. This consult might help to confirm or reject the working diagnosis and may provide information on the potential treatment options. If a patient's health problem is outside a clinician's area of expertise, he or she can always refer the patient to a clinician who holds more suitable expertise. You should never let your ego ride on you and say that I can handle this patient. What if it is something which I've not done before? That kind of undertaking something should never happen. If you find it beyond your scope of, or you are not particularly very, you do not hold the expertise, you can always refer the patient to the person who holds this expertise. And there should not be any formal ego in terms of doing this. Maybe maybe your clinic will not have the necessary equipment, like for example, you are planning to extract an impacted tooth, but ideally it is better to have an IOP or OPG done before you do the procedure. You should not let your ego of, yeah, I can handle it, to take the better of you and go ahead and do the procedure without doing that necessary step of taking the IOP or OPG. You should always you should always follow the protocol, and it's important that you do that. So if you do not have the facility, refer to a or a radiographic facility where the radiograph can be done, or refer to another facility where the radiograph and the treatment can be carried out. And clinicians can also recommend the patient to seek a second opinion from other clinician to verify their impression of uncertain diagnosis, or if they believe that this would be helpful to a patient. Now, to be honest, sometimes it is very, sometimes it can feel a little patient, it can feel a little like it will hurt you when patient said, doctor, you said something that day, but I went to another doctor, but he's saying a different thing. Then you should not get the feeling that, oh, yeah, I told you all this, but still you went to some other person and you are trying to now come and argue with me. You should not take it, in a personal, or a, kind of like an, in a negative way. Patient has all the right to take a second opinion, because it is the patient's health that is here in question. So if he takes a second opinion, be encouraging of it. And this serves two purposes. One is your working diagnosis, or your diagnosis and treatment plan will be either confirmed by another person, or it will be, it will be like contradicted by another person. But look at what the other person is also saying. It is always good to have another perspective. Don't take this in a negative way, and please don't reflect or act upon it. Take it in a good way. And I know it is easier said than done, but this is what we are getting trained for. It is very important that we do not take it in the wrong way. Even when we become patients, we have all the rights to take a second opinion. So does our patient. So if he takes a second opinion, please do not take it in a personal matter. And when patient put forth an argument saying that doctor said this doctor said this, please don't be very dismissive. Try to make the patient understand why you have suggested or prescribed what you have done. and why you think the patient should do it. So that is the right way of doing it. And many groups raise awareness that patient can obtain a second opinion on their own. And diagnostic consultations can also be arranged with the use of integrated practice units and diagnostic management teams. This is the way going forward. So a lot of you will be practicing in immediately as soon as you finish will be practicing in government. Then after that you might engage in the government, you might work in private clinics, you might start a clinic of your own, or you might integrate yourself in someone else's practice. The way going forward is if necessary you should always integrate. You can always locum specialists into your practice, or if wherever you are working, if any kind of a specialized treatment or procedure is diagnosis is required. This is the we call this an integrated practice, where a clinic is essentially run by a general dentist. And whenever a service of an oral maxillofacial surgeon is required, or orthodontist is required, or endodontist is required, they can come to you. Either if they are working there full time, it's fine, or they can come to you in consultation basis. They can give you the diagnosis, and they can also even perform the procedure on a consultation basis. They can come there, do the perform, and go back to their own practice or whatever they do. And you can periodically kind of bring them in for managing your patients. It's called an integrated practice, and this is the way going forward. So what are the traits of a successful diagnostician? Observational skills, listening skills, listening to the patient. Please don't get impatient with the patient. Sometimes patients tend to tell a lot of incoherent things, and this you can commonly find with two age groups, two or three category of people very commonly. One is children. You ask children something, they might divulge, they might go into something else. Elderly, some elderly, they can also be, they can also be interrogative. They'll ask about you. They'll ask you about oh, you're a doctor. Where did you study? How did you like how long have you been practicing? Are you married? These kind of questions will come. Please don't take this in the wrong sense. Please approach them courteously. And another this thing is patients with disabilities. uh, Try your best to listen to them as much as possible. It is time consuming, but over a period of time what we tend to do is we also as practitioners tend to get impatient, because we repetitively see, when you see some a couple of number of patients, 10-15 patients a day, you tend to get a little impatient. And when patient is talking, we cut the patient while they are talking, and we tend to ask the leading questions that we want, the information we want about. Sometimes cut some slack, give some leeway, let the patient talk to you, establish a communication. You are going to do some heavy procedure on a patient, and the patient is going to he's putting his health in your hands. It is important to develop that bond and trust, and that bond and trust has to be established in a couple of minutes. You're not going to get a whole day. You're not going to of course you're not going to like live lifelong with a patient. It's not like you're trying to develop a life relationship. It's a kind of a working relationship, but the patient, it should be good enough. Your communication and listening skills should be good enough that the patient is able to trust you, and this should be established within a few minutes. And for achieving that, observation and listening skills is very, very important. A courteous approach above all is very important. Even sometimes patient who comes in pain can be very, can sometimes be offending to a dentist. It has happened in our own. Some of you might have even face this in our own practice. A patient will be in pain, but when you are trying to take a history, patient will just outright say things why are you asking me all this? Just bring someone else. I don't want you to see me, or something like that. So just be courteous, understand the patient's situation, and try to be accommodative as much as possible. It doesn't mean that if a patient is exclusively, purposefully being offensive, or is being kind of intimidating, then you don't have to put up with it necessarily. But see, you have to make that you have to make that decision right there when you're observing the patient to see why is he just reacting that way because of his condition or his pain, or is he really just a bad person. So that kind of understanding has to be made right there in the chair. But no matter whatever the patient is, even if he's an offending patient, be courteous and try and explain to him that you cannot treat him successfully if he keeps up the tone, or if he's being very offensive, intimidating, or under disrespectful. Then you move on from that according to the patient's behavior. But in general, be always very courteous, be respective to the patient. Please always address them with respect. And knowledge, it's again very important. You need to know all the diseases. You need to first know what is normal, you need to know what is abnormal. Then interest and curiosity. Interest, intuition, and curiosity is another important component. Just don't make a blunt decision. Always be interest. If only if you have that interest, intuition, curiosity, you will start noticing things like, why is the patient limping, what is his problem. When the patient is coming towards you, he limps, but he doesn't say anything in his medical history. Then you can ask him, sir, I saw that you were limping, why were you limping, can I know what is the problem, and to see if there is any relevance to that, to our treatment, or if you can help him in terms of any in an informative way. Is there any way you can help him? Or sometimes this is one thing that you will sometimes very rarely come across, patients who are subjected to abuse. It could be anybody, it could be of any walk of life, it could be an elderly, it could be an teenager, it could be an adult, it could be an senior citizen. They could be subjected to abuse, but they might not be forthcoming to talk about it. And but sometimes they'll give you signs, and when you have this interest, intuition, and curiosity, you will be able to pick up those signs from the patient, and you will be able to further investigate it and help them whenever possible. And finally, above all of them, patience. It's very, very important. You have to be very patient with your patients. Sometimes, like I said, there will be a lot of irrelevant and incoherent things happening around you when you're talking to a patient. So it is very important that you practice patience with your patients, and be courteous to them. I would like to conclude this lecture with a beautiful quote by Mahatma Gandhi. Correct diagnosis is three-fourths the remedy. For addressing a problem, first you need to know what the problem exactly is, and that is what diagnosis is about. So, like I said previously, it is not just for seating a patient or treating the patient. Whether you are going to be a clinician, or whether you are going to be who from all I can understand, that you might be a private dentist, you can also be attached to an institution in a teaching facility, or you can also be in the government. You can be a policy maker, you can be someone who advises the government how to approach a particular problem when it comes to dentistry, and all of these things. So no matter whatever it is, diagnosis plays a very key role, and only when you know a problem, you will be able to effectively treat it. I hope you understood the things that we were discussing in this lecture. And if there are any doubts, please feel free to ask all of us anytime, be it GD or oral medicine. You can talk about it to any faculty in our college, and stay safe.